Well, my name is Dean Zucchero, or Zucchero, however you want to pronounce it. I play bass guitar. I am a songwriter and a producer. I gig around town and I tour with various acts and then do local work. I have a local blues show that I do here where I provide bass accompaniment for a different blues artist each night, 4 days a week at Bratzial in the Bywater. Yeah.
Where were you born at? Were you born here?
I was born in New York, on Long Island, and then as a teenager, late teen, I moved into the East Village, and I spent many years there. And I came down here 10 years ago.
Gotcha. When you moved to the East Village, was that about the time you were gaining your independence, or were you still with your parents?
No, I was getting my independence. I was starting to play with a band, and we were working a lot in the city. And I always wanted to live in the city. You know, all our parents were born in the boroughs of New York, and you know, they grew up there, and then there was a mass exodus. Everybody moved to Long Island because property was cheap. They raised families, and then all their kids moved back to the city.
Right.
You know,
right.
Especially for the arts, you have to be back in Manhattan for music.
That was where I was going next. I was going to ask if it was a hotbed. Did it attract you because of that characteristic?
Yeah, I mean the industry is there. You know, we were gunning for success, and we had a pretty together band. So yeah, you had to be in the city. We were touring, we start later on. We did East Coast stuff, but we were mainly focused on building a fan base in the city and tri-state area.
Mm-hmm. Was there a lot of venues? There was a lot of action for bands to be able to get gigs. It was.
Yeah, I mean New York was great. I mean this was the late '80s. This was the '80s, and there were hundreds of places to play.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that kind of changed in the '90s when the zoning laws changed because of the leadership change at the mayor's office. Sure. So a lot of venues went under because now rents went up. They doubled.
Yeah.
So you lost. Somebody counted in the '90s. We lost like 48 live music venues within a couple of years.
Wow.
Which is a lot. You know, there was still a fair amount, but that was a good number.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's the '90s.
Yeah.
But the '80s things were rocking. You know, we were playing all the time at some of the bigger venues. Of course, the Bitter End and the China Club and the Cat Club. Those places. The Bitter End is still around.
Yeah.
But Mercury Lounge. You know.
Yeah.
And CBGB's. We did our first showcase there in the '80s.
Now they were well established by that point. What was it? Was it not so much a pinnacle, but was it a special event for you being able to go play there? Was it something that you had
at CB's?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it was hard to get in there.
Right.
I mean, it really was. The owner was pretty tough and very selective. They'd have like audition nights, and I don't think we ever did that. I think we tried to get in there a number of times, had no success, and then we ended up hooking up with a pretty high-postured manager, and he made one phone call, and we were in there.
Isn't that the way it goes?
Yeah, and we did our showcasing there. It's pretty wild.
Yeah, that's awesome. Did they? What was their? I guess practice or regimen. I guess for instance, I had interviewed a club owner, and he would have a band come in on a Wednesday or a Thursday
Right.
to see if they could draw, and then if they did well enough, they would do the weekend.
Sure.
Was CBGB's like that,
Yeah,
or any of those
course.
clubs?
I think they did auditions on like Monday. I mean, it was pretty brutal. Like they would bring in maybe book 10 bands,
Mm-hmm.
and you're supposed to go on at 8. You go on at 11. It's just like there's delays and extended show times and everything. So, and then I guess if you pass the test, qualitatively and economically, you brought some, people in, then
Sure.
maybe you get another date.
Yeah. Did it help moving forward? Was it like a notch in your belt to be able to say that when you were trying to get in
sure.
at other clubs? And
I mean, the big clubs back then were were CBs, you know, for original music. The Mercury Lounge, that was a little bit later, the Mercury Lounge. That was more in the 90s, late 90s, I think. But the China Club and the Cat Club, those were the three big ones for original music. And, you know, back then, the band I was with, we had a residency at all of them at some point.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it was helpful. And then once you get in there, anybody will, yeah, the rest of the city would follow suit, you know.
Yeah. I've always imagined it more densely populated there, and I would imagine that would help with being able to pull a crowd and having so many venues. The per capita supported it. Was that the case back then?
Yes and no. I mean, yeah, there were a lot of venues. There's a lot of people, but there's a lot of distractions. I mean, there's a lot going on. So to get people to come down, you know, you really have to hammer away. I mean, nowadays we do it on the internet. We send out an email. Back then there were no emails. We'd send out mailers. It would take us, you know, once a month with all our shows, and it would take us like 4 or 5 guys, take 4 hours each time to handwrite everything.
Oh wow!
So you know, is that you had to hammer away at it, and hopefully, you know, we had a good draw. We had a pretty interesting band. I think with good songs. I listen back now with you know, modern ears, and I say, wow, that was pretty together unit, you know.
Nice.
So anyway, to answer your question, you know, sometimes it's a city that's you know, New Yorkers they've seen it all, or they think they've seen it all, and so it's hard to get their attention.
Yeah.
You know.
What about the genre you were playing? You said blues. This
wasn't a blues band. It was it was a funky, artsy pop band, you know.
Yeah.
You know, influenced by all the stuff in the 80s. You know, the big bands with the Police, the Talking Heads,
Sure.
U2. You know, we were a rock band, I guess. And I didn't get into blues. I was always fascinated with blues, but that came later.
Okay.
When things started to wind down with this band.
Sure.
And probably the catalyst for it, because I was more interested in just kind of playing bass now and just being a blues bass player.
Yeah.
Not being so caught up in, you know, in writing music and trying to record it and trying to get it out there in the universe.
Yeah. Was that the MO in the beginning? And was this a band that you formed or fell in with?
Yeah, I was one of the co-founders.
Okay. What was the name of that band?
The band was Anastasia. We started as Anastasia, and then we changed our name at some point to Major Domo, and then later on we finally got signed to an indie deal, but this was like 8 years into our career. Mm-hmm. You know, we had a couple of opportunities that slipped through the cracks. Yeah, so it was a 12-year relationship that I had with this singer. He and I kind of formed the band, and we wrote all the music. You know, some of the other guys were writers as well.
Sure.
But it was a cool band. Great singers, you know, 4-part harmonies and everything, and just a very dynamic band.
That's awesome. It's nice that you can look back on it now finally and still appreciate the work that you did, you know?
Yeah, I think I appreciate it more now when I look back. I say, wow, this was, you know, there was this, we had a fan who was kind of, you know, we had some deadheads. The deadheads are always good. They're very loyal, and,
sure.
You know, they if they like you, they're in, and they follow you everywhere. And we had a little base of that. And one of them used to tape all the shows. Mm-hmm. And he had it on cassette, you know, for years. And then maybe, I think during the pandemic, he transferred it all to digital.
Uh-huh.
And I ended up getting files from about 15, 20 shows, which is like precious.
Yeah.
I'm listening to myself as a bass player in the 80s, you know, and songs that I wrote that I don't even remember. It was pretty wild. So I'm listening back and I'm saying, wow, that was a pretty cool band, you know. I think there was an appeal to it.
Sure.
But I wanted to play the blues at some point.
Yeah, that's cool.
And I kind of shifted.
So your inspiration during that time was kind of pop and rock, trendy, Police, things that were you were hearing on the radio present day. When you were growing up, like, I mean, before you even picked up the guitar, What kind of music were you listening to, or what kind of music were your parents listening to? What inspired you back then?
It's funny. I had this conversation last night. I mean, I grew up, I grew up in the 70s and a little bit in the 60s, and my parents were listening to popular music. So all the great crooners, Jerry Vale and Tony Bennett and Frank Sinatra, and then the popular stuff, the Beatles, Elvis. My father liked Elvis. He had some Elvis records, and I remember I used to listen to them. And then all the great rock and roll of the 70s, the British invasion kind of trickled into the 70s. So you had Elton John, you had McCartney and Wings, sure. Simon and Garfunkel, American band, all the popular stuff. John Denver.
Yeah.
Then my brother had a bunch of albums that were very influential rock albums, and I still remember them to this day. It was
the older brother.
My older brother. Yeah. Who's Next by The Who, which is my second favorite album of all time.
Yeah.
And then some Led Zeppelin. The song remains the same. No, Houses of the Holy.
Okay.
And Black Sabbath, Paranoid, and then he also had Cat Stevens, Tea for the Tillerman, which are like four of my favorite albums to this day. So those really influenced me. And Queen, we loved Led Zeppelin, The Who. I was a big fan of in the 70s. So that's the stuff I grew up listening to. I grew up listening to rock or blues rock. I wasn't really listening to Muddy Waters. I was listening to Jimi Hendrix.
Okay.
That was my connection to the blues world.
Sure. I mean, part of that British invasion was heavily fueled by the blues.
Yeah.
I mean, they were kind of regurgitating it back to us in a different form,
Absolutely.
With a European filter, I guess you could say. But it sounds like your parents were listening to the more mellow side of things, while your older brother was introducing you to more rock and roll, rowdy type music. You know? And did you gravitate more towards one or the other?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big Beatles fan. I've always been. To me, it's the end all for songwriting. I just think they're fantastic, and they raise the bar so high.
Absolutely. For
rock and roll, for all sorts of music. So I'm very tuned into that. I've always been. I was having a drink last night, and song by Burt Bacharach and Dionne Warwick came on, and I had a conversation with the bartender. I said, I remember listening to this song, Walk On By, when I was a kid.
Yeah.
So I love that stuff. My writing is, we can talk about it in a little bit, but it's influenced by, I guess, everything I've listened to.
Absolutely.
You know, but I love to rock out. I play blues. I pride myself on my ability to play most styles of American music fairly okay. I've gotten to a point now where I can get by on just about any gig. So I like to rock out still, but I like to play funk. I mean, I did the gig with Cyril Neville for like 6 years, so we were playing a lot of New Orleans classic, funk stuff and rhythm and blues, and that helped my chops in that department really.
Absolutely.
A lot.
Well, I mean, blues in itself is a roots music. I mean, there's so much that's been built upon it or built off of it. You know what I mean? So I mean, if you know your way around the neck playing blues, then you can just switch your tempo up a little bit.
And it's rootsy. It's always rootsy. Like I think for blues, I don't like hybrid music so much. I like blues rock. I like blues in any music, but I don't like jazzy rock. Mm-hmm. And I don't like, but I love blues rock, and I love jazz. Mm-hmm. But I love jazz infused with blues, but not really blues infused with jazz so much. Yeah. So I think blues is always a good ingredient to use in any style of music. It adds some color to it.
Yeah. When you were in the East Village and you were starting to gain your independence and starting to play clubs at that time, where did you see yourself going with the band? I mean, was it something? It seemed like it was more than just a pastime for you at that time.
We were all in.
Shooting for the stars.
I was
huh?
shooting for the stars.
Yeah.
You know, I had decided early on that, you know, I used to fantasize about playing music in a band
Yeah.
even before I could play the bass guitar.
Okay.
And I remember having these fantasies that for me, if there was a band at the dance, it was the end all. I just fell in love. So it's been in my brain, my DNA since early on. And at some point, the opportunity came about where I was able to enter the scene as a physical musician now, and try to channel it to. You know, we were going. You know, we were showcasing for top labels. I could tell you funny stories. You know, where we thought, oh, this is it. You know, we got this. You know, the president of MCA flew in from LA to see us because his A&R guy said, you got to see this band.
Beautiful.
And then as the night progressed, his partner got drunk and passed out at the table, so he left early. And then when our manager got in touch with him the next day, he said, what did you think? He goes, I liked him, but it wasn't that great. And then he passed on the band. So, it's like, so we kept trying, and then eventually we found an indie label that took us on and invested about $500,000 into the band. So we got things going. You know, back then that was a lot of money for
Sure.
You know, you know, we toured a lot. We were doing like East Coast runs pretty much. We never really made it west. Did the college circuit. We were a fun college band. You know, it was wild and funny, and so I got sidetracked. What were you just saying?
It's no problem, man. We can ramble on, and that's what this is for.
Yeah.
It's awesome to be able to be escorted through and relive the times with you for sure. You know, I guess I wanted to know.
Were we going for it? Yeah.
Yeah,
we were going
basically,
for
what
it.
you were aiming for, because I mean, it sounded like it was serious to you. It was something that you were pursuing heavily, and the rest of the band too, for the amount of time y'all were putting in on promotions and things. You know.
Yep. And then you know, then at some point the band we disbanded, and I wanted to just pursue a career as a bass player for a while and run with that. You know, there were a lot of cool blues bars in the East Village that were still open, and I could work every night. You know,
Right.
so I was interested in that. But at some point, you have to realize, you know, when you're in your 20s, everybody wants to be Mick Jagger or, you know, the next whatever. But at some point, when you hit your 30s, you have to reassess and say, well, why am I doing this? You know. Is it for the fame and fortune? Well, yes, part of it, you know, to get the girls, as McCartney said, and not have a day job, yes. But do you really love music, and do you love to play it? And my answer to those questions I asked myself were, yes, I love to play, and I'm going to continue to do this and pursue it, you know, at a different level.
That's interesting. A lot of times, at least I have found in interviewing other musicians, a lot of them pick up an instrument when they're really young, you know, let's say 12 or even younger, but let's say around 12, 14 years old. And it coincides frequently with the time in your life when you're trying to find a sense of your own identity.
Yeah, sure.
And then you find yourself with two questions, not only who am I, but who am I as a musician? You know, what am I expressing on stage? Sometimes what they listen to is not what they play.
Right.
Just like you had many different influences. One came out on stage. But so now you're kind of revisiting this mindset in your 30s. And it was, I guess, like they say in business, a time to pivot. Like you had to decide, you know, am I going to change my aim? Am I going to change my approach? Am I in this for the right reasons?
Right.
Specifically, what were you looking at? What were you addressing with this conversation that you had with yourself?
Yeah. Well, I wanted to play music, and you know, and then I picked up a pretty high-profile blues gig in my 30s, and I got to tour. All of a sudden, I was playing in front of fans of 15,000 people, you know, in Europe, and I was like, well, this is pretty amazing. This is what this is kind of what I wanted. I kind of went through the back door.
Yeah. And
I won't say who the artist was, but you know, it didn't work out because I didn't care for this person dealing with him. So I left the band, and then I was a little bit disenchanted. You know, I was in a relationship at the time, and that kind of floundered. And I decided, well, maybe I'll just stay local. You know, maybe the touring thing isn't for me. You know, it was quite amazing, but in light of all the things that could go wrong on the road, I thought, well, maybe this isn't the best route. So I took a little break. I finished my schooling. I was going to go back and get a degree in entertainment law. I went back to NYU. I finished up, and then I took a job at a law firm for a couple of years, and I was waiting to get into, NYU law. I wanted to go to a top law school because I had been advised that, for the entertainment law, it's very selective, and, they want people from, the top schools. The lawyers don't care, but the clients care So I figured, well, I'll go to NYU and I can stay local and I can still play music. Mm-hmm. Well, I didn't get into NYU a couple years in a row, and at that point I was so disenchanted with the whole scene. I was just like, what am I doing? I miss playing music. And I went back, and I remember walking down those stairs that day and said, okay, never again. That's it. I'm full. I'm all in. And I went back to playing. And
so you weren't playing while you were in school?
I was playing while I was in school, but when I got the job at the law firm, I wasn't playing so much.
Gotcha.
I was pretty busy, and you'd have to work late hours, and you had to be on call all the time. So I just said, I'm going to put that aside for a little while. And then slowly but surely, after about 8 months to a year, I started peeking at some of the jams and seeing my friends playing, and I started showing up with my bass, and I just kind of got back into it.
She came calling, huh?
Yeah. So that's kind of the story. And then I just decided that's it. I'm a lifer,
Yeah.
So
the stint of time that you spent pursuing college and then afterwards entertainment law. Did you take, I'm sure you did, but what of it did you take with you? Were you able to take some of the knowledge that you gained with you
Sure.
and implement it into your own career
Yeah,
now?
the career, the industry, you learn about that. And also, finishing up my education, a lot of writing, I always loved to write, and I've had a little bit of a knack for it, but just having to do it in such heavy concentration,
Yeah.
you can kind of really find your voice in a creative way. So that really helped me become a better writer. I have kind of maybe 1/4 of a book written, which I'll get back to one day. But it helps me with lyrics and
Mm-hmm.
writing creatively. So I'll say, for that alone, I think I'm a better lyricist, having gone through that heavy concentration of literature and writing.
Scratched a part of your brain that didn't get scratched on stage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I think it's important to be organized. I'm not incredibly organized, but I do have. I am structured, and I think having that for any industry is important.
Well, sure.
For music, for songwriting, for producing. I have a structure when I go in of how I'm going to go about this, taking this song from nowhere and putting it on tape, and how I'm able to do that on the bass guitar, I think so. Discipline is important in any field. And
sure.
You learn that along the way from different interactions with various professions.
Yeah. Well, I think you were going to get it done one way or the other because, like you said, when you were in that first band and y'all would each dedicate 4 to 5 hours per man, a few times a week to be able to pursue email lists, which is, a lot of times some guys just slap stuff on flyers. Physical mailing lists. A lot of times people just slap stuff on a telephone pole and maybe paper a few blocks, but that's something else. I think that's how you were able to kind of nurture a following of the
that was the grassroots
invaluable
way.
Deadheads, like you talked about,
Yeah.
Have you enjoyed any of that? I guess not so much reminiscing, but being here and looking back on what the scene was back then in New York. Have you seen any kind of, comparable following? Is there anything that it compares to? I ask because oftentimes people will reminisce about their heyday, and they'll talk about how much more rich and lively the scene was, or
Right.
the music was. I mean, are there elements that you've seen, or elements that you've seen reappear or disappear over the span of time? Is there anything that sort of congeals the two? Because you've changed
Yeah,
while you've
it's
been
changed a
living,
lot.
you know?
I think that we live in a bubble here in New Orleans because music is part of the economy.
Yeah.
And that's important. It's not part of the economy in New York. Maybe back in the 40s and 50s when people used to go out dancing every time on the weekend, every night. You know, there was a live band. There was no DJs, and DJs started in the 60s or something. So, so down here we have the ability to play music and earn a living. Mm-hmm. You know, as one drummer put it, he says, you know, and the saying about New York, if you can make it in New York, you can make it anywhere.
Right.
And as for New Orleans goes, if you can't make it in New Orleans, you can't make it anywhere.
Sure. Yeah.
So there's an abundance of work. So I feel fortunate for that, that I don't have to get a day job. But things have changed drastically. You know, the music scene in New York is dwindled, and I know a lot of musicians who left New York to even come down here. I mean, in the 90s, not to get all political, but you know, the mayor changed the zoning laws, so now all of a sudden landlords can charge what they want. There's no more rent stabilization.
Okay.
It was kind of rent controlled, and there was a lot of flexibility. So, you know, Manny's Car Wash, for example, which was a super cool blues club on the Upper East Side, great place, and his lease expired, and the landlord said, okay, you at least, you know, we're going to double your rent, and he's like, okay, I'm out. That's my profit for the month, you know. And he closed Chicago Blues, Mondo Cane, Mondo Perso, Dan Lynch. Dan Lynch owned like 4 bars. They all went under, and those were cool blues bars that you could play all the time. There's one other I can't remember. So they just started falling. So, and that hasn't recovered. So yeah, there was a heyday for live music. Now, what do you have to do, you know, to survive as a musician? I don't know. You relocate maybe, or you know, you got to find a way. And you know, I had some younger guys ask me, well, how do you do it? You know, I said, well, you do it by making a full commitment to it. And if you have it, you have to do everything music. I know you need money, but you have to find a way to make money through music. And if you have a day job, then you can't dedicate hours upon hours of sending out emails, contacting people, practicing, learning songs, and then going out and networking. You know, It's a big part of it.
Yeah. Just showing up. Really.
Showing up, and that's, you know, you know, it's not easy because it's a catch-22 problem. You know, if you don't have the work, then how are you going to feed yourself? You know, and if you don't have the availability, well, how are you going to find work through music? You know, if you have a day job,
right?
Well, you find a way. You know, you give lessons, and then you get out and you try to gig and build your strength as a player. And your repertoire is important. You know, knowing a lot of songs. So when somebody on stage says, you know this song, and you say no, and they go, all right, I'm going to bring up somebody else, because then you go,
sure,
you know, because you lost an opportunity. So, you know, that happens over time, and especially down in New Orleans, where there is a grand songbook, and I didn't know it when I came down here, and I've learned it over time. You know, the standards that everybody wants to play, the meter songs, Fats Domino, all those tunes. You know, there's hundreds and hundreds that get played every day. So learning those songs, and I think you gotta go all in.
Yeah.
You know, but it's harder now. I agree.
That was interesting. I caught that there was a change in the administration and subsequently a change in the zoning laws, which changed a lot of things for venues where you were living at the time. I read Dr. John's book, Under a Hoodoo Moon,
right,
and he describes in the 70s a point in time I forget who came into office. It was like a new sheriff or mayor, somebody,
Right.
and they started to change basically the street politics,
Right.
whereby venues were kind of working with street hustlers and working girls and everybody else, and it was its own little microcosm, and they all managed just fine, untouched, working with each other. And things started to change, and it caused, in effect, a mass exodus where a lot of guys from down here were moving out to like LA. You get a
Right.
trickle of one or two, and they call back home and they say, hey, this cat's got work,
Right.
come
Sure.
on out, and more followed. You've been, just because of your own choices, moving back and forth between New York and New Orleans. When you first came out here, was it because of that situation that you're describing, or was it like, had you had it with all of that and you just had to get out, or were you exploring?
Well, there's a little bit happened before. In about 2004, end of 2004, I picked up this gig with this R&B guy in New York, and we had this residency at a jazz club in Shanghai. So I went with them, and I thought before that, I said, I kind of want to travel. It was funny because how it happened. I bumped into an old guitar player, a friend, and he says, "Yeah, I'm going on the road with so and so." I said, "Really?" And I was thinking, man, I want to start traveling again. And I said, "Well, you tell so and so that if he needs a bass player, I'd be interested." So the next morning the phone rings. "Dean, you want to go to Shanghai?" I said, "Give me 1 hour." And I ended up going to Shanghai. And we spent 3 months there. And then from there, we did a residency in Europe, in Zurich, Switzerland. And I thought, wow, this is great. This is like my dream. I always had this romantic dream of playing jazz in Europe,
Sure.
We were in a jazz band, but and I ended up staying for like 9 years. So
Wow.
till 2014, about 13, I was in Switzerland for 5 and in Italy for like 3 or 4. So when that, and I started playing with some American acts there, expats, but a couple of cool European bands, a jazz band in Italy. And I came back home because my apartment situation fell through, and I wasn't completely part of the system yet. So finding an apartment on my own was hard. Mm-hmm. So I came back home, we finished the record, and I was going to go back to Europe and do a tour with this band. And the tour kind of fell through.
On this album that you had?
No. This is
okay.
the Italian band, Sugar Pie and the Candymen. So I was going to go back and because I was comfortable in Europe. My roots are from there. I like Europeans and I love playing music there. So it fell through. So my brother's like, well, what are you going to do? Because I had no more apartment in New York. And I was staying in my brother's basement for like 3 months.
Wow.
I said, I'm going to go down to New Orleans. I'm going to give it a shot. So I came down. And then, I just canvassed the whole place. I brought my bass everywhere, and people are very communal. They'll invite you up, And within a week, I had I had a gig, like a residency, and I was making some money. I figured, well, why don't I just move here? This is great,
Sure.
How could you complain about this?
Yeah.
Because for a lot of musicians, it's hard to find work. So, so I stayed, and that's kind of how I ended up in New Orleans.
What was the album that you came and completed?
The one.
Before you returned to Europe, I believe. Before you returned to Europe and then subsequently moved back.
It was an album with Sugar Pie and the Candymen.
Okay.
They were just popular, like jazz band, pop jazz band. Very, very, very cool band. Some fine players, and it was their record. They were on Irma Records. I think it's I don't know where the label is. Somewhere in Europe. Mm-hmm. So that was their record. I forgot the name of it, but I was on that.
Hey, have you heard about NewOrleansMusicians.com? It's a place where articles, music videos, interviews, and streaming music from Louisiana musicians can be found. Fans can join free. Music business professionals can join free too. And Louisiana musicians can join for free as well. It's also the place where Louisiana bands go to network and get free promotion. We've definitely got plenty, like this band. Check them out.
albums with them. And then I came down to New Orleans, and then, within a short period of time, I hooked up with the Caesar Brothers, and then from that I got the gig with Cyril Neville. So I was with Cyril for like 5 or 6 years, and it was awesome. I got to play with one of the, the original Neville brothers, and an original meter.
Did you really understand who he was at that time?
Yeah,
So,
sure.
I mean,
I did for sure. Because I was a big fan. I loved the meters. In 1989, I came down to New Orleans to see Jazz Fest. Mm-hmm. And, I bought a whole bunch of records, and I brought them back, and records that I just constantly listened to. Some of it was Meters, some of it was Dr. John, the classic.
Staples, yeah.
And so I learned all that stuff. But I could never play it with anyone who knew how to play it. I guess I didn't know how to play it either. So now all of a sudden, I remember I had the record Live at the Queen Mary,
okay.
McCartney's party where he had the Meters play live. So you listen to the Meters. So I knew that record really well.
Okay.
And I loved Cyril because Cyril was my favorite singer. They all sang great.
Yeah.
But Cyril he was so versatile. So when I got the gig, I was just like on stage and I'm playing the song. I saw them at Jazz Fest in where was it? Not Newport. It was Philly Jazz Fest.
Okay.
And I saw that my friend, it was a deadhead. He said, "You guys check out this band." And I saw him. I said, "Wow, I never heard anything like this." They were playing, grooves that were just so hip.
Yeah.
And we grew up listening to funk, but different funk, like Memphis funk, James Brown funk. But the Meters and the New Orleans funk is different.
Yeah.
And it hits you in a different way. So I thought, wow. And he did Love the One You With. I thought, wow, this is so cool. And I remember, cut to the chase now, 20-something years later, I'm on stage playing that song. And I remember thinking, I remember when he sang that song that night, and now I'm on stage playing with him.
Yeah.
So it was cool, yeah.
How were the crowds overseas, like you were talking about in Europe and Switzerland? How were you received? And I'm curious, genuinely curious, because I interviewed it's a country music band that found a big following for country music in Switzerland.
Right.
And you kind of wrinkle an eye for a second. You're like, I would have never guessed it.
Yeah.
But are there pockets out there?
Sure. They love music. They love American music. It helps if you're an American, let's face it, you're considered authentic, whether it, but I think two of the best guitar players I've ever worked with are from Italy. So, it doesn't mean you can't play.
Right.
But yeah, there's plenty of work. And what had happened was when that residency in Zurich had ended, I stayed because the owner said, "Look, I have another band coming in. You want to do it?" So it was like another, 60 days of work. I said, "Yeah." I said, "I got to go back to New York do one show." He says, "I'll pay for your flight. You come back." And he goes, "I got an apartment for you." And at that point, I had met a girl. We were falling in love, and I said, "Yeah, I'm going to stay." So after a couple of months, I said to the guitar player, because we had a pretty successful blues band in New York called the Healers featuring Thomas Buck Nasty. If you don't ever saw Thomas Buck Nasty, he's just the greatest. He's the greatest singer I've ever worked with, him and Cyril Neville, and awesome entertainer. So, but he had some issues going on in his life, so we kind of pulled away from that. But I said, "Let's bring Tommy over." Karen goes, "Nah, really? It's going to be a handful." I said, "Let's do it, man. We'll take over." We brought him over. We took over Europe. I mean, we were touring for like 9 months straight. It was so easy to get work. I would just send an email out. "This is the video." I'd say, "This is going to be the best band you've ever had at your club." And they'd write back, "Okay, how much you want? Let's go." We got into all the big clubs. So we started touring that way. And to answer your question, yeah, if you have a good band, you can work in Europe. They like the concert. Mm-hmm. It's not like sometimes when you're in New York, it's when you're playing music, you're like inconveniencing the audience. They want to chat.
Yeah.
But in Europe and in New Orleans too, they're good. They're focused. They come to see the show.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, there's work, and I've worked. So I lived there and played there for 9 years, and then since then I went back and I've toured there a lot. You know, with Gallia Vault, Cyril. We went to Africa. Mama's Boys, a lot of shows, a lot of tours with them. So there's work to be had.
Yeah.
And some people stay because the lifestyle's great.
Yeah.
It's very attractive.
It's incredibly intriguing for someone who's never been. I can only imagine.
Yeah.
It's good to have that in your pocket too, because it's another option, you know, in case things aren't panning out wherever you're at for the moment. You know.
Sure.
It's funny though that you found yourself wanting to travel again, and I guess it kind of life handed that to you in a big way. I mean, the first time you were doing it, you kind of got tired of the road,
right.
and, you know, a little bit of the person you were working with, but a lot of the atmosphere in the road. And so you stayed put for a while, and then you said, okay, I guess I'll dip my toes in, but you just jumped in with both feet.
Yeah.
It was a lot all at once, you know. But you didn't turn it down, so I mean, it panned out beautifully, yeah.
It did, and it really changed the course of my life. I remember I was playing at the 55 bar, a show, and I lived in the East Village, so I could walk straight across town, and it was pretty direct. But I figured, let me walk down Bleecker Street, so I'll bump into some people. Maybe, you know, you never know, you know, because there were still venues open on Bleecker Street for live music. And sure enough, I walked past the bitter end, and I bumped into my friend, and that's how the whole thing started. So had I not taken that route down Bleecker Street, I may not have ended up in Europe, at least in that situation. From that. So, you know, it's funny.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that and the realization that you're playing the song with Cyril Neville that you heard on a record 12 years earlier, being played by Cyril Neville.
Yeah.
I mean,
they were playing it live.
Does it make the hair stand up?
Yeah. I was tickled pink, you know, playing with him. It was great. I love Cyril. And then pandemic came around. He kind of changed things up. He's been using, you know, he's really set on. His own career, of course, but he's doing more guest stuff with Trombone Shorty. You know, he goes out solo, but he's trying to push his son's band, Omari Neville. He's got a nice band. He's a singer and drummer, songwriter. So he just kind of took that band. He's not really doing Cyril Neville and Swamp Funk anymore. Okay. It's all Cyril Neville featuring Omari Neville and the Fuel.
Sure.
So it was a nice run. I played like 4 jazz fests with him. Went to the West Coast tour, went to Africa. It's great.
That's beautiful, man. Yeah. Your time spent so far, what is the relationship between time spent kind of as a hired gun and time spent working with your own band? Because it seems like after the first band that you were really trying to push, you were kind of a hired gun for a while. Right. You would enjoy residencies here and there and even overseas, but is this something that you're revisiting now?
It's a little bit of both. I think I had been talking about doing my own record for years, and I'm not a lead vocalist per se, and I have too much respect for the position of lead vocalist to botch it up, you know, by just singing in a very mediocre way. But I have a love for songwriting and production. So I figured during the pandemic, there was a lot of time, so I ended up writing a bunch of songs. And then I said, well, I'm going to do this record. I don't know what it's going to be. It's, you know, I was thinking like a bass-centric record, but I figured I don't even like listening to those records. So why would I want to make one, you know? I figured I'm going to write songs and kind of in the blues genre, and I'm going to put the record out. And I had done production on a couple of records for Roof Records years prior to that with Gallia Vault. I produced her first and second album. So my production chops were good. And I went into the studio. A drummer friend said, I know this guy uptown. He's got a nice studio. Why don't you just come in and let's just record? Because I told him I wanted to do a record. So I went in, and the guy was really able to deliver the sound I wanted sonically on the drums and bass. The engineer was great. Rhythm Shack Studios, Jake Eckert. And the drummer was Doug Belote. And we went in and we tracked like 3 songs or 4 songs with just bass and drums, which I never do. You know, usually when I produce, I go in with a band, we're rehearsed, and we go in and we track as much live as possible, you know, which is cool. But I didn't have a band, and some of the songs weren't even completely written. Mm-hmm. So I went in, I tracked them, and then I just started bringing in guests. I brought in, you know, John Fole, and then I had a song that I had written a while back, lyrics I liked, and I asked Johnny Sansone, I said, do you want to sing this song? And he said, sure, man. And at that point, you know, during the pandemic, we had started music up. We were kind of the first to restart the music scene because Braziol had a beer garden.
Right.
So I was vibing with all these guys. We were doing shows outside. It was great. So Johnny says, yeah, man, you got the support of a lot of people right now. I'll be happy to do the record. And I know Johnny for a while. So he did the song, and I thought, wow, this is great. Like, I'm just going to go more in the direction of this. So then I brought, you know, I started overdubbing. John Fole played a little bit of guitar. Then I had a song with Papa Molly. I brought him in. And then I was trying to get him to sing the song, and he says it's a little too high for me, but he recommended a singer, so I got Leslie Smith, and the record started to evolve slowly.
Beautiful.
Those 4 songs. So I went in and I did another session with Terrence Higgins on drums this time. Uh-huh. Anyway, the record progressed. I finished it, and then I had to promote the record properly because I felt like it was a good quality record in terms of songwriting, and also fun to listen to. It had 9 different lead vocalists on it. It had 25 musicians.
Wow. So I hired a promotional team to do it. People I had worked with before, you know, with Roof Records and all. And we put the record out. And the reception was great. It hit number 1 on the Billboard Blues charts. It debuted at number 1. Yeah, so, you know, Johnny Sansone said, see, I told you something was going to happen with this record. I didn't know what to expect, but I thought the quality of the music was there. And because of all the influences I had as a kid growing up. You know, we talked about the Beatles and listening to all that popular music. So, you know, that influence comes from somewhere. And, you know, if you grow up listening to, you know, Victor Wooten, who's, you know, a phenomenal bass player, then you're going to be a more bass-centric kind of bass player. Yeah.
But I grew up listening to, you know, Led Zeppelin, Paul McCartney, like song bands, you know, song bass players. So that helped, I think, put together a record of, and the reviews were great. You know, it hit the charts in Australia and UK and top 5 in France. And
were you surprised?
Yeah, I was surprised, but I was very flattered. But I think the record stands out because I put a lot of time into the songwriting, and I will say this, and you know, I don't want to tick anybody off, but I think the blues has gone a little bit sour in terms of songwriting. Mm-hmm. Over the years, because it's become more of a platform for gunslinging. You know, great guitar players who can really play, and they're amazing ones. You know, they're all good, and they just come up with a riff with a very cliche lyric, and they just want to show off their chops, and they do, and the audience claps. I mean,
sure. I
thought, let me put together a record that has really good songs, catchy lyrics. Like, I work hard on the lyrical aspect of my music. I'll spend weeks and months on one lyric. I said, let me do that, and I think it might attract some attention.
Yeah.
And it did.
Yeah. It was once said by a guy that I interviewed, he's been a bassist for many years, and he's more into heavy metal, but he plays jazz and, you know, a few other things, a few different genres. And he was talking about, and I've understood this too, he was talking about how a good, and specifically with bass, because that's his chosen instrument, he was talking about how a bassist can be in the spotlight, in the front, just blowing down the audience with some sort of, you know, technical aspect of playing the bass, and or they can hang in the back and you can almost not realize they were there.
Right.
If he wasn't there, then you would notice, but he's doing it so well that you don't notice.
Yeah.
And it takes a certain sort of acumen and taste to be able to apply yourself in that manner where it's not too much. I mean, everybody loves salt, but if you put too much, it ruins the pot.
Correct.
You know? So it was interesting for me to hear you say that you wanted to apply it in a certain manner on this album. And it sounds like you had such a great reverence and respect for the people that you worked with that you felt almost obligated to put your all into it after it was done. And that's awesome that it worked out for you so well. Name the album, please, and where they can find it.
The album is called Electric Church for the Spiritually Misguided. And you can find it, in New Orleans at Louisiana Music Factory. It's, a lot of fine music stores nationwide and all musical platforms. But please buy and don't stream because, we want to keep these artists around. And, if we can recoup some money, we can do another record, which I'm doing now. That's where you can find it. Amazon, Apple, or iTunes, whatever it's called now.
Sure. And on CD, and just CD?
CD and digital downloads.
Digital downloads.
On all musical platforms
Gotcha.
that sell them.
You and I, before we started recording, you had expressed an interest in vinyl, perhaps for your next project, or is that going to be something you consider for this past
I'm going to do it. I mean, this isn't really a touring act. I put together a show that I'm going to do probably at the Broadside in March, and it's going to feature pretty much everybody on the record. So they'll say Dean Zucchero presents Electric Church for the Spiritually Misguided, featuring, and then boom, everybody. That'll be the show. I never had a CD release party. So to answer your point, to answer your question, it's not something that I'm going to go out on the road to do. So having vinyl, I could sell vinyl at shows that I do locally, but it's expensive and it's tough to transport. And but I'll do it just so I have of this record and probably the next one.
Sure. Yeah, like
and I know some people would have bought it. It's like, well, I don't even own a CD player, but if you had vinyl, I'd buy it.
It's experiencing some sort of peculiar resurgence now, and I'm enjoying that. I'm enjoying seeing that because it kind of shoo-shoos away the digital commodity in general. Do you know what I'm saying? Because there's a different audience that has an appreciation for vinyl, not just the people that grew up on it, but the people that weren't familiar with it up until now.
Sure.
So it's really cool for me to see that happening, and especially in such a way that affords artists the ability to do maybe like a limited run special color or something like that. I mean, you can put so much more in it and you have so much more space to really manifest the character of the album,
Yeah.
I wanted to talk a little bit about your recording style, your production style, because you had mentioned that you like to do it live, as close to live as you can.
Right.
And so it's my understanding that was a popular method years ago, and then at some point it changed where they would isolate each instrument.
Right.
And maybe you could talk a little bit about what has appealed to you sonically, how it manifests itself sonically, what you hear.
Look,
your
you could
style.
I like to do it live. The two albums that I produced with Gallia Volt, we went in as a band, and the first record, we used the Mama's Boys as the backing band, and I said, man, I want these solos live, and that was really live. Some guitar players don't want to do that, but there's a mojo to the music when you're approaching it that way. You got to get it right, because if somebody messes up big time, we got to start all over again. Yeah. But it keeps you a little bit on edge in a good way. So I like that. But the 60s, the Beatles used to go in, and in 3 hours they'd set up, and they'd record a single live. Everything. They sang, they played the solos, Lennon would play the harmonica, everything was live. The harmonies. and that's why that music is fantastic. And over time, I think McCartney was considered to be the first bass player to overdub. I think he tried it on Sgt. Pepper's.
Okay.
And then, then 4-track went to 8-track, and I'm not sure if you listen to Abbey Road. There's a lot of separation on that record. It's a very clean sounding record. It sounds like a Neve board to me. I'm not sure when it first started. The Neve board around 70, 71. So there's more isolation going on, and I like that too. But you still, whether there's isolation, you should still be going in there trying to track it live and go for a take. Now in modern times with digital recording, it's very convenient, and the editing capabilities are amazing.
Right.
And to a point where I think it's dumbing down the musical population. Like Steve Gadd, I was watching an interview with him. He's like, back in the day in the 70s, we would go for a take, as a band. We were trying to do that. Now it's like, I've been hired on sessions to just, I don't even, they never played me the whole song. They're like, okay, here's the chorus, just play this. Okay, here's that, just play that. Okay, here's that. And then they put it together, and there's no compositional component. Right. Whereas if you know the song, you might have to be reading, but you play it from start to finish, and there's a progression, and there's composition to it, you know, and the song could, peak a little bit at the end. And if you make a mistake, you could fix it, So I still try to do that. As I said, my new record, which will be out sometime this year, I did track with bass and drums.
Okay.
Again. Yeah. And I'm going for parts, and I try to get that live feel with the drummer, and I stick with it. I don't go in there and start playing around with the bass line, adding riffs and stuff. I live with it. That's how I played it, and that's the song. So and then we layer from there. So it's a little bit of both. I like the old school. You listen to you watch the Beatles playing. The album for Let It Be. McCartney's he's singing live the song Let It Be, and the band is playing. They're doing the backup vocals live. It's amazing to watch. And you listen to McCartney, and I never noticed this until about 10 years ago. The last verse, when he goes to that A minor chord, his fingers slip off the keys, and he plays like A sharp, and then he pulls it back on. But the take was so incredible that they kept it.
Yeah.
So,
I like that, man. I like, and that's, I think, partially where my fascination with doing this, and also with diving into behind the scenes and the story behind the bands and things like that, because you come to discover little things that were going on in and around the recording process, or maybe the writing process, like what went into that. Well, he had a shit day that day. You know what I'm saying? Like, or, he broke up with his girl and then he wrote this song about his dog or whatever. It's just incredibly interesting to me, because without these little happenstance moments in time, we might not have some of the things that we know and love so much today,
Yeah.
It's super cool. When you're recording and it's kind of separate, like you're talking about, does it feel a little sterile? Because I know you talk about not a lack of inspiration, but it's hard to read what the mood or the vibe is of the song, where the crescendo is. And
I know it because I have it in my head now, and especially this record. Like, all these songs are kind of written before I go in. Whereas the first record, there were a couple of tracks that were like cool bass tracks, and then I built songs from them. So I kind of know, and you got to work with a drummer who's got good skills at sensing what's happening, what could happen, and also just laying out and playing good pocket stuff.
Sure.
There's less improvisation on my end. I usually go in, I have a bass part. I'll move around. I'm kind of a 60s style bass player, so I like a little bit of free form.
Sure.
And the drummer can kind of sense that. I had Mike Lesher from Walter Trout's band coming through the city last month, and he said, I'd love to be on the record, So he was great in the studio. Like I sent him, I mean, I literally played the bass parts to a metronome and send a file from my phone, and then they chart it out.
Nice.
But they can hear what's going on. And he was watching my hand through the booth window to see how I was articulating or how I was going to articulate, and he was catching some of the accents. So the right kind of drummer can be really good at that.
Yeah.
You know, could I do it with a guitar player? Yeah, I think I did one song with Jake. Jake's a really good guitar player as well. So we tracked together on one tune. Mm-hmm. So I find the inspiration, and I try to use drummers that can you know. One drummer I used was just like, he was a little frustrated, but for the most part, he still did a great job. And when I played him the song, he's like, wow, if I only knew. It must be fun for a drummer to listen to something like a song coming to life long after you originally tracked it with the bass player, you know?
Yeah.
So you gotta find inspiration, you know, and I'm focused on songs. Yeah. You know, I'm trying to write songs. It's not about, I want cool bass lines, but it's not about me as a bass player. It's about me as a producer and a songwriter.
Yeah. Yeah. When it comes to the engineering side, the mixing, mastering, after anything after recording, are there measures that you prefer to take or you like to see taken that I guess preserve some of the grit? And I don't know how to better describe that. I remember there was a Crosby, Stills and Nash. It might have been the first album, I forget, but they had it mixed by two different engineers because the first one made it sound too polished. And they said, that's not what we're going, that's not who we are. Like, it made that much of a difference.
Yeah, the engineer is very important.
Have you had any personal experience with that sort of situation where things needed to go a different route in order to preserve what you felt like was there in the beginning?
I mean, yeah, sometimes it's an economic imperative, you know, where you can't afford to do another round and you live with it. But you try to be selective and find people you like, people you've worked with before, people whose records you've heard. And they're a good engineer, like David Farrell mixed the first record, Gaia. And, you know, we were all there, and I love David Farrell, and I know he's got a lot of experience in blues music, roots music. So I respect what he has done, and he did a great job, so I was happy with that. The next record we used, we went to Zebra Ranch in Jim Dickinson's studio from back in the day, and now the Mississippi All-Stars, the Sons, they own it. And Kevin Houston did a great job mixing that record. And then the last record I did I was trying to work it out with David Farrell, and he was just too busy that summer. So I said, well, Jake and I were coming up with these little mini mixes that sound fantastic. So I said, well, why don't you mix the record? It's just, and he did. He did a great job, and you know, he worked with me and tried to give me what I was looking for. And also, sometimes you want to just take your hands off of it and trust them as well, because you know, they have a lot of experience in areas that I'm not an engineer.
Sure.
You know, and I know that. You know, you gotta trust the people. You gotta hire really good people.
Yeah.
And trust them a little bit too.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I can't wait to listen. I appreciate that copy, man.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you very much. I'd like you to let everybody know not only about the upcoming album for the artist that you put me on to, but anything else, including Brett's. Let them know about these places and these things that you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, I do a blues show at Braziol 4 days a week, where I bring in a different artist each night, and it's become a lot of fun. And you know, we managed to have some of the finest players, you know, I mean, Johnny Sansone plays there, Bruce Sunpie Barnes, Dale Spalding from Canned Heat. I had Jimmy Vivino last month. Just guys love to do it because it's fun, it's easy, and Sven, the owner, treats us really well. He gives us a nice German meal and some good beer. So I do that. Some other gigs around town. Sometimes I sub with Little Freddie King or Johnny Sansone. And I tour with Gallia Volt a lot. I have over the years. I have some other tours coming up, which I can't say at this point.
In the works.
But another thing that's going on that's pretty cool is I have a record label called Pugnacious Records.
Okay.
And my record came out on that. I started my own label. And an artist that I had been producing in tandem with my record, Sean Riley, we put the record together, and he said, well, why don't we put it out on your label, because tentacles are all out there, and it might be a good opportunity. And it kind of makes sense because I was involved. And so I just put that out. We did the pre-sales last Friday, the release. The street date is March 8th. It's called Stone Cold Hands.
Okay.
By Sean Riley in the Water. And he's a fine guitar player, singer, and songwriter who I think is going to do quite well. He's been around. New Orleans knows him. He plays a lot. We did a tour in Australia this past August, and we'll go back again in August. So he's got some things rolling, and check him out as well.
I'm sure you got a lot to show that guy. I mean, with your track record, you've been around for a minute. You could probably take him on a tour. I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, he's great. He kind of said, you produce it, and I'm not a heavy-handed producer. I try to get the artist to shine and just try to discover what the best qualities of this person are and how to bring them to the fore. And if there's a part that needs to be done, I'm not one to write it. I'm going to say, you got to come up with a part that's something like this. And, Sean was able to do that really well. And I think the record's awesome.
That's good. That's good, man. I'm excited for y'all. Well, that's cool, man. I think we about covered it. You have your website. Please mention that too.
Yeah, DeanZucchero.com, DeanZucchero.com, and then Pugnacious Records. My little pug is the mascot, hence the name, and then Sean Riley in the Water.com as well, SEAN. Those are the three websites that I'm involved in right now.
All right, man. Where's the pug? He's not here today?
The pug is with his mama because I thought it'd be too chaotic.
Is he a New Yorker pug?
No, he's a
down south pug.
He's down south pug. He's
that's a good mascot. Then.
Yeah.
All right, man.
He's
cool.
Awesome. He would have been all over me and you too.
Yeah. Good choice. All right, man. I appreciate your time, Dean.
Thanks
Thanks
you.
a bunch, buddy.
Really appreciate it.
All right.
Had a good time chatting with you.